The first thing that we're going to talk about today is the difference between proofreading and editing. Now, I'm sure you've heard both of these terms and you might have wondered, well, what's the difference? They're the same thing, right? Not exactly. So when you think about proofreading, you're thinking about things like typos, misspellings, punctuation, inconsistencies, missing words, things of that nature. When you are editing, oftentimes when you're editing, you can actually change the meaning of what is written. So editing might take someone's document and change the tone of the document. You might change the transitions between paragraphs. So that could change the way the document comes out. So when you think about editing, think about making changes that might change the meaning of the document. And when you think about proofreading, think more about typos and punctuation errors. When you're editing, oftentimes you're trying to find more clarity, right? If someone is being too wordy, you might want to edit their work. Again, changing the meaning. So when you think about the two, think about changing the entire meaning of something versus looking for typos, misspelling, punctuation, and things of that nature. Now that we know what the definition of proofreading and what the difference is between proofreading and editing, let's think about how we can prepare to proofread our document. Oftentimes in the workplace, there are distractions, right? So as soon as you sit down to proofread your document, what happens? The phone starts ringing, one of your coworkers comes by to chat, all of a sudden your supervisor wants something ASAP. It seems like whenever you sit down to concentrate, when you want to have specific time to concentrate on proofreading, there are always distractions. So one of the things I want to talk about is how can you, if not eliminate, minimize distractions when you are proofreading. So again, it's probably impossible to think that you can eliminate all distractions, but as much as possible, you want to minimize those ringing phones, talking coworkers, noisy copy machines. The more distractions you can eliminate, the easier it will be for you to proofread and do it accurately. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips that might help you when you are eliminating distractions. One of the things you want to do is make sure that you are comfortable at your workstation. So proper chair, proper lighting is something else that you want to take into consideration. Don't try and proofread in a dark corner where you can't see the words well. You want to make sure that the lighting is right for proofreading. Again, comfortable workstation. Make sure that everything that you need, so if you need any backup documentation, if there are reference materials that you need, if you have any sort of supporting documents that you might need in the proofreading process, you want to make sure that you have those at hand. You want to make sure that you have those right in front of you so that you're not having to get up, find what you need, get back into your rhythm of proofreading. Because what happens is once you stop and start, oftentimes what happens is it gets you out of that rhythm of proofreading. And then you're more prone to make mistakes when you're trying to go through the document. So just make sure that you have everything you need assembled before you start to proofread. If possible, see if you can put a do not disturb on your phone, or perhaps have a coworker or someone else grab the phones for you. If you have any notifications on your computer that pop up, for example, email notifications that make noises, if you could silence those, you might not be able to turn off the notifications, but just silencing those will help you as well. Any of these things that you can do will all help you to minimize the distractions that often happen when we sit down to proofread. So make sure that you have everything in place so you don't have anything that will distract you from the actual proofreading process. All right, so we know what proofreading is, and we figured out how to create an environment that is conducive to proofreading. Now let's get down to actually proofreading our document. What are the first steps to do that? Well, the first thing you want to do is think about, how can I proofread quickly while still making sure that I'm not making mistakes when I'm proofreading and missing items when I'm proofreading. So let me just give you a helpful hint about speed when proofreading. Speed is desirable, of course. As I said, we're working in a very fast-paced environment, but it can cause you to make mistakes. So one of the things you can do that will help you to proofread fast but also accurately is very simple. Use your finger. Use your finger to guide you down the line, down your sentences, through the paragraphs as you are proofreading. Now what this does is it helps you to go line by line and keeps you on track in terms of what it is that you're looking at. And you can scan oftentimes with your finger a lot faster than if you just look with your eye and you don't have anything to guide you. So that's one tip. Another thing that you can do is use some sort of a straight edge. So a ruler, a piece of paper, the length side of a piece of paper. All of those things will help to guide your eyes as you are going down the page and proofreading your document. So now you have some tools, or a tool, a straight edge, a ruler, or even your finger to help guide you as you begin this proofreading process. So now let's talk about typos. Typos are probably one of the most common types of errors that you're going to see when you start to proofread. And this is simply because oftentimes we know the words that we're typing, but because of speed, because of distraction, any number of reasons, we type in the wrong thing. So when you are typing, you often make mistakes in capitalization, spacing, punctuation, spelling. All of those are these mechanical errors that you make as typos and these are things to look for when you're proofreading. So I'm going to go over just the top proofreading mistakes that you see. First one is incorrectly spelled names. A lot of times we'll spell someone's name wrong, and that is probably one of the worst mistakes we can make, especially if we're sending something to someone who is at a higher level than we are. So you really want to make sure that you watch that. Transpose numbers. A lot of times we'll transpose numbers in addresses or in when we're talking about calculations. That's another problem that we see a lot. Incorrect dates. You write down that the meeting is on Friday the 5th, and it's actually on Tuesday the 15th. And everyone shows up on Friday the 5th, and there's no meeting. Embarrassing, right? So you want to make sure that you check for dates. Capitalization, of course, that's something that really makes you look unprofessional if you don't capitalize the proper words, so look for that. Words or phrases entered twice. This happens a lot where we type the same thing twice. It often happens with smaller words like to or on or a. Those are words that you'll often see, so watch out for those. And then just incorrect punctuation in general. Subject-verb disagreement. So again, these are all kind of grammatical errors. And then, of course, misspellings and contractions. So those are all things to look out for in terms of typos. So here are a couple of ways that you can avoid leaving words and characters out when you are proofreading. How can you catch this error? The first one is to slowly read the copy out loud. And of course, the copy is just the words that you are using in your document, also known as copy. So you read the copy out loud slowly, and oftentimes when you do that, the errors are very apparent. This is one way. Now, reading out loud is a great proofreading technique in and of itself, but especially when you're checking for omitted characters or omitted letters, right? The other thing you can do is to read the document backwards. Now, that might sound a little crazy to you, but think about it. When you're reading a document, if you read that document backwards, you're actually reading everything out of context. See, what happens is when you're reading something in context, meaning you're reading it the way it was written, oftentimes what happens is we don't see the errors. We see what's supposed to be there. Our brain plays these tricks on us, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the webinar as well. But think about that. Anything that you can do to switch the pattern of how you normally read is going to help those errors just glare right out at you. So that's another tip. And again, I'm going to revisit that a little bit later in the webinar. I'm going to give you even more tips that you can use to catch errors. But those are two when we're talking about simply leaving out characters or leaving out words completely. I want to give you another tip when it comes to proofreading. And this is something that you may or may not be familiar with, and it's something that may or may not help you, but I'd like you to at least be exposed to it in case it's something that could help you. This is this idea of having a style sheet. Now, what a style sheet is, it's a tool that proofreaders have used for many, many years, and it's really just a guide for the proofreader that defines the style elements in the document. And so what it does is when you sit down to proofread, it's almost like it gives you a list of things to look out for as you're proofreading. So you're very clear on the types of errors or the places where you're looking for possible errors. So a style sheet is usually broken up into 3 or more components. A basic style sheet would talk about style considerations, formatting considerations, and typeset considerations. Style, formatting, and typeset. And again, depending on the type of document, any of these or all of these might be necessary. So when we're talking about style considerations, we're talking about things like the format, spelling and capitalization, hyphenation, punctuation, abbreviations. All of these are style considerations. When we're talking about format, we're talking about things like typeface, tabs and indentation, margins. What are the margin sizes? So the measurements of the margins, any spacing. It's another thing we talk about when we talk about formatting. And then finally, typeset is talking about things like the size of the type and maybe the width of the type. And so again, a style sheet is simply a sheet that sets forth the parameters or the elements that you want to be looking for before you sit down to proofread. And it helps you to be a little bit more organized when you're proofreading a document. Now, when you're proofreading, it is very, very helpful to proofread with someone else. So team proofreading is going to be a lot more effective than if you sit down and proofread your own document by yourself. But if you need to proofread your own work, I'm going to give you a couple of tips for that. The first one is don't proofread your document right after you finish writing it. Now, again, I know sometimes you might have to do that just because of time constraints. You have a deadline, something has to get in. I understand that. But if you can, I always like to wait till the next day if I can. And of course, like I said, sometimes that's not possible. But if you can wait, if you can even wait an hour, take a walk, get away from the document before you dive in and start to proofread. This will help you to proofread with a fresh eye. It's very helpful. And then, of course, read it very slowly. So again, if you can't have someone else read it to you, read it very slowly and carefully. Use the tips that I mentioned earlier about the ruler or the straight edge. And then reading it backwards. I mentioned that before, but that's really a great tip to isolate words and characters out of context, and that will help you to catch more errors many times. So speaking of these tricks, these mind tricks to overcome our minds, which our brains, which will see these words and phrases and characters in our document as they should be, rather than as they are with the errors. Let's talk about some other mind tricks that will help us to find these oversights in our document. We've talked about it a couple of times already, but it bears repeating. Reading the document backwards. I just want to get into what exactly do I mean by reading the document backwards. So it's simply reading from the last word in a document to the first word. You begin at the bottom of the last page and you just move right up towards the top of the first page to find spelling and usage errors. It's pretty simple, but it's not something that a lot of people do. And it's a great way to catch errors because, again, you're throwing off that pattern of how you normally look at something. Another tip is to look at the centers of words to spot spelling errors. So when you're looking at a word, instead of reading it from the beginning to the end, look at the center of the document. That's oftentimes where you'll see the missing word, or you'll catch the typo a lot quicker when you look at the center. Diagonal. This is another different, kind of different technique, but look at the page and scan the first word at the top left and jump across to the last word at the bottom right of the document. Or start from the top right of the document and cross down to the bottom left. Again, you're switching the pattern. You're changing the way you look at the document. And oftentimes, this will help you to catch errors. I always recommend that you print out a hard copy of your document and don't proofread from your computer screen. Now, again, there might be times when you have to do that, but it's preferable to go ahead and print that document out first and proofread from the hard copy as opposed to proofing from the screen. A lot easier to catch errors that way. And it's easier for your mind to kind of digest the material when it is printed out. Another thing that you can do is turn the hard copy. So once you've printed it out, turn it sideways. Instead of looking at it lengthwise, turn it sideways. You can blow up the document, so enlarge the document. This is a great tip. So use your copier to enlarge the document, and those errors will just be blaring out at you when you sit down to proofread. We talked about reading out loud. Very, very helpful to read out loud. We talked about having someone else to proofread with you, so read along with you. Another great one is to use colored paper, believe it or not. When you use colored paper, again, the errors that you might see as you're proofreading just stand out a lot more, especially if you use something fluorescent or bright like a pink or a green. It will really stand out to you. We talked about using a ruler or a straight edge. Two others would be using colored highlighters or colored pens as you proofread to, again, guide you along the document. These are all great ways to make sure that you catch all of the errors when you're proofreading your document. We talked earlier about proofreading on screen, and while I don't recommend it, these are some tips that might help you when you are proofreading on the screen. And I mentioned this one before, but this is really important if you're going to proofread from the screen, is to proofread twice or even 3 times for different types of errors. So one time might be for mechanical, one time might be for content errors, punctuation. Not trying to proofread all in one chunk is especially important if you are proofreading from the screen. And then when you are proofing for mechanical errors, you can use your cursor and move that cursor from word to word. Now, this serves almost like the ruler or your finger, as I was talking about earlier, when you're using your finger to guide you through the lines of your document. And then look for words that may have been somehow omitted or added when you revised the document. We all know how mysteriously, whenever we're dealing with documents, we go back to look for the document and it's gone. Same thing sometimes happens with words. When we revise something, maybe we forgot and we edited something out. So make sure that you look for anything that maybe was left out if you're revising a document. Again, when you're looking on the screen, if you're editing on the screen, look for hyphenation. Make sure that the hyphenation is correct. And spell check the entire document. And we're going to talk a little bit more about spell checking later. Of course, proofread the entire document, but do it in chunks. And then I would recommend, even if you proofread it from the screen, to print it out. And then, of course, read it one more time just to make sure you've caught everything that you need to catch. Another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're proofreading from the screen, take those frequent breaks. Get up, walk around. Don't try and proofread it all in one sitting. And then use all the shortcuts and tools that are available to you on your particular computer software. Every computer has different tools that are available. So just make sure that you're familiar with the software that you have and use all of the tools that are at your disposal.